Well, I'd like to start with the importance of hearing women's stories. It was Virginia Woolf who, in her book A Room of One's Own, imagined that Shakespeare had had a sister. Now, Judith Shakespeare had just the same passion and talent as William, but because she was a woman, she never found the space to tell her own stories. She could get no training in her craft, Virginia Woolf wrote. Men laughed in her face. And after a catalogue of disasters, she found herself with child. She killed herself and lies buried at the crossroads where the buses stop at Elephant and Castle. For me, I think that story has such a symbolic power because we know the kernel of truth at its heart. We know that for so long, women have been denied their voices. They haven't been able to find the space to tell and share their stories. I know there's still a long way to go, even in the theatre, but we still have come quite far. And I like to think that if Judith Shakespeare was alive today in London, that she might be working somewhere like the Donmar Warehouse or the Tricycle or the Royal Court, theatres where women directors are actually at the helm and making sure that women's voices are actually heard. But we do really still face a challenge to make sure that women's voices are heard clearly, particularly on the most difficult and challenging subjects like violence, abuse, and harassment. I was powerfully reminded of that fact myself a few years ago when I'd just written an article for a newspaper about lads magazines, a short article. And I got an email from a young woman, a teenager called Carly. She wrote to me and she said, "I'm so glad you wrote that because I thought I was the only woman in the world who felt like this, who objected to all the pornography, the sexism around us." That email really set me wondering, it really set me thinking, wondering why it is that women's voices aren't being heard, those women who object to this hypersexual culture and what it does to women and objectifying them. And that email was a powerful spur to me, inspired me to write my last book, Living Dolls, in which I tried to capture the voices of women who feel uncomfortable in this hypersexual culture. Now, since that book was published, I think there's been a huge change, and I salute the work of my fellow speaker today, Laura Bates, and her Everyday Sexism project, which has opened out this space for women to share their experiences of sexism and harassment, and in doing so, to find real solidarity. Because I know that Carly would not be able to write to me in the same terms today. She wouldn't feel that she is the only woman who felt like that. She would know that there were other women out there feeling the same way. With this surge in storytelling, of course, the challenge that remains to us is how we can harness that power to actually drive change in society, to challenge violence against women, to make sure that we can actually change the sexism around us. And I also want to ask why it is that certain women aren't being heard so clearly. Because there are some women whose voices I think we still aren't listening to. A few years ago, when I was working as a journalist, I met a woman called Angelique. Angelique had come to this country from the Congo. In the Congo, she had been targeted because of the political activities of her father. Soldiers had come to the family house. Her parents had been killed. Angelique had been taken into prison, where she'd been repeatedly raped. Eventually, with the help of friends of her late father, she'd escaped the prison. She was taken to England, where she hoped that she would find safety and a chance to rebuild her life. She applied for asylum, and this country does have a duty to give asylum under the Refugee Convention to people that have a serious risk of persecution if returned to their country. But Angelique was denied asylum. Without papers, she had no right to work here, no right to any support. She began to live on the streets. She was literally walking from one end of London to another, looking for a meal, for a bed for the night. While living in that way, she became pregnant, but she went on walking from church to drop-in centre to charity until she could literally walk no further. Meeting Angelique had a profound impact on me, and it made me ask, why don't we see, why don't we hear women like this? I think it had a particular resonance for me, this encounter, because my own grandmother came to this country as a refugee in 1938 from Nazi Germany. she found a safe haven here. But I think I was always aware of just how devastating that journey had been for her, to have to leave her country, leaving her parents behind who were killed. It was as though a boot had just come down and stamped out her happy memories of home and childhood and the people and places she loved. But she was able to find a safe haven here. She was able to rebuild her life. I worry that in many ways things have actually got worse for women who make similar journeys today. That encounter with Angelique had such an impact on me that I set up this charity, Women for Refugee Women, that works with women who've sought asylum in this country. And recently, we've been collecting stories of women who are held in detention in the UK for research which we'll publish in 2014. I think it's a fact that few people are actually aware of, that thousands of women who come to this country seeking refuge, seeking a safe haven, are actually locked up in detention here. You may know that a terrorist suspect can only be held for 28 days before being charged. I could take you now to a detention centre in England, and you could meet women who have been locked up for weeks, for months, for a year, for no crime, for seeking asylum. One of the women I met while doing this research is a lesbian who comes from a country where homosexuality is illegal, because it was known that she was in a relationship with a woman, and her family were very against it. The police actually arrested her, and she was raped in the police station as a sort of punishment for what she was doing. And so she came to this country looking for safety. Being locked up here in detention was such a torment to her, reliving the trauma of what she'd been through back home, that she actually tried to kill herself here. Virginia Woolf said, "As a woman, I have no country." For me, that sounds like a powerful idea, but also a really scary one, because who will protect us if we have no country? But she also said, "As a woman, my country is the whole world." And that's the dream that I'd like to share with you today, that we could actually build a vision of equality, a safe world for women, that isn't just about women like me, women like you, women in this room, women in this country, but would be big enough to include women who cross borders, refugee women, migrant women, that we would take off those labels that divide us, forget the fears and stereotypes we have. I think that in order to do that, we have to learn not only to speak, but also to listen, which is why I've chosen to end my talk today by inviting my friend Meltem to come up and speak to you. Because I met Meltem when she was 13 years old, and she was locked up in a detention centre in the UK after coming here, fleeing persecution. And a few years later, I think she has a really important message for all of us who want to build a world that respects the rights of all women, and not just some.
Hello. I came to this country with my mother because we were running away from persecution. When we came here, we applied for asylum for safeguard in this country. Women were being tortured and raped in my country. England refused asylum to us, and at the age of 13, we were locked up in a detention centre. Even now, I hear the banging of those doors. The windows would only open a few inches, and there would be roll calls 3 times a day. It was horrible in there, as you can guess. The people in there were good but bad at the same time, but no one could help. So we didn't know what to do. I remember when we were released, my mother hugged the guard she hated the most. She felt such joy. I will never forget her face. Back then we campaigned and we stopped the detention of children. A lot of people helped with the struggle, and we did achieve it at the end, we did. But I know that as I'm standing here now, there are still hundreds of women who are being locked up in Yarlswood Detention Centre, and they do need our help, and I think they should be released. You may look at me and say, she's just a refugee, she's just an asylum, or she's just a migrant. But I have the same dreams as you. I'm a woman like you, and I have the same desires as you. So please, let's come together and build a fairer world. Thank you.